Welcome back, you guys. I'm so excited because we have had Phillip Folsom on the show before, but never in person. It's the first time in the studio. We had you on via Skype. Do you remember that?
I do.
And we love him. In fact, so many people at CARD love him because I mentioned that the last 2 summers we've gone on retreat and put ourselves in the hands of Fulcrum. And we're going to talk more about that later, but we really put ourselves in the hands of Phillip and his team, and he has valuable hands. He has their healing hands. I would definitely say that. So we all love Phillip here. And this summer, while we were on retreat, you and I had a brief conversation. I said, Phillip, you got to come back on the show. And you said, okay, I have something I really want to come and talk about. I really want to come and talk about something called the Sparta Project. And I only had time to hear like 2 sentences, and I went, yes, please come and talk about this, because I can see all the different ways that this connects to the autism community. But start by telling us what the Sparta Project is and what it does.
The SpartaProject.org is basically a war detox. It means it's a 5-day residential program for veterans, first responders, police, fire, who are dealing with PTSD. And one of the symptoms of that is a very high suicide rate.
Yeah.
And so our program is a very holistic way of rebooting and processing out a lot of that toxicity and trauma and giving people a shot at their lives back.
Yeah, you're saving lives.
Literally.
Yeah, literally. And I, earlier in the week when I said, okay, we're having Phillip Folsom on and he's going to talk about veterans and stress and suicide, and only one person said, isn't your show about autism? I don't. And I went, yeah, you don't see how that all connects. So for anybody who doesn't get it, let me just say, and I think most of you do, those of us who are parents, we experience something that even science has shown that it's akin to post-traumatic stress. And so many of our viewers, so many of our parents are both mom and dad, or mom or dad, are serving in the military. And honestly, when I think about our kiddos, so many of our viewers now have kiddos that are teenagers and young adults, and we know that they're going through some very stressful situations at school, and sometimes have incidences which cause a PTSD kind of thing going on with them as well. And we need to be talking about this. As a community, we all need to be talking about this. I had said earlier that pretty much every week we have a story where a parent there'll be a murder-suicide, where they'll have a child who's on the spectrum. They will take their own life, but first take their child's life. And it's devastating, unthinkable to so many of us. And people get very angry and say, well, that, it's murder. And I happen to agree with that, but we have to acknowledge that there is a mental issue going on with that parent. So often we hear that the parent is somebody who was loving and kind and not abusive to their child. And if we as a society don't deal with what happened leading up to that, it's a disservice to everyone. So talk to us, Phillip, about your background. You're a veteran, yes?
I am.
And so these are things that you probably know a little bit about.
Yeah, I'm a veteran, and I'm also somebody who's been deeply immersed in the mental health leadership development community for 25 years. And what I'm seeing is this is not a veteran situation. It's not an inner city conversation. This is a societal conversation. And I think I have naturally gravitated towards the veterans because, being one, it strikes dear to my heart. But there's also another component with veterans, is that I equate them to kind of this polar bear a role, in that there's a lot of things going extinct right now. Every day we're losing a species. And we don't really care about the things that are not sexy. But we care about the polar bears, because they're big and sexy, and they're an apex predator, and they're all these things. So if we can save the polar bear, then there's that trophic cascade, which means that everything gets saved. So the veterans fulfill that role for us. So there's a sea of goodwill. There's people who are outraged when a veteran takes his life. Whereas we're seeing a very similar PTSD rate, suicide rate, with our inner city, but it's not quite as grabby to mass middle America. as our veteran conversation is.
Yeah.
So if we can pivot some of our best minds and our resources and our wisdom and love into this veteran conversation, and our firefighters, our police, our first responders, then we have an opportunity to expand and force and multiply that healing out into the rest of our society, because it really is a societal conversation. There is something that is toxic about our current state of affairs. And Krishnamurti, he said, it is no measure of health to be well adapted to a profoundly sick society. And we've been born into that condition, and so we don't really even see it because we've been swimming in that water since we were born. And I have an analogy that I use where I have noticed that I have seen seagulls my whole life, but I have never seen any baby seagulls.
Yeah.
And so what the baby seagulls are is this blind spot about the way that we treat each other, the way we deal authentically with diversity and the people who are different than us, the way we deal with trauma, anxiety, depression, and the whole scope of mental challenges. And it really is a spiritual conversation in many ways, which people are afraid to use that word even.
Yeah.
But the word psychology is not the study of the brain. It's the study of your soul. That's psychology. So ultimately there is this soul healing conversation that has to do with us as not only individuals, but as a society in general. And I think that's the Holy Grail.
Yeah. And you can see why we love to be around Phillip, because you just feel better around Phillip always. But so I want to get back to the Sparta Project, because clearly you're finding things that work. And that's really what we want to talk about, because as you were saying, we can spread that across everyone. So describe for me, it's 5 days, did you say?
And I think our knee-jerk reaction to all of our problems is throw pharmaceuticals at it, and take them to a ball game, and there it is, rah rah, thank you for your service. Let's not talk about that anymore.
Yeah, where are you going next? Disneyland, right? As if it's all going to be okay because you're back.
Yeah, and
it's not.
22 push-ups and like this, and then okay, I'm done with that.
Right.
Whereas it really, there's a little bit more work to be involved to fixing some of these things. So a few of the commonalities about this are that we have a societal problems because we are not adapted to be in this world. We're adapted to be in much smaller, more intimate, more purpose-driven, collaborative organizations called tribes.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that we're discovering is when we take people from a tribe system, which is an intact family, when we see kids with autism, when kids who are even going from a military deployment situation, who are undergoing tremendous trauma.
Yeah.
But they can deal with it at that point. We're not seeing radically boosted suicide rates out in the field.
Right.
But we are seeing a massive amount as soon as people return from deployment and they re-enter that sick society, which is the civilian world. It is not a combat issue. In fact, our combat troops have a matched suicide rate as our behind the lines troops.
Okay.
That seems to match very closely our inner city conversation, our prison population. So people who are raised in a condition of having high trauma, which is poverty, neglect, abuse, any of these things that I imagine autistic kids are growing up with and families are experiencing.
Yes.
The trauma load of that experience must be very similar to some of my population that I work with. This is referred to as pre-trauma, and it's kind of like filling a cup up, so that where it's we've already topped off what we can handle, and so the next big acute trauma that hits, which is a wartime situation, moral injury, a spiritual injury, that sloshing tends to be some of the big primary components to post-traumatic stress.
And it starts to send things over the edge.
Absolutely.
The cup runneth over in a really bad way.
Yep.
So you bring them together for 5 days. I'm curious about funding for that. Are there funding sources that help families that can't afford to do it? Because I'm sure there's a cost.
It's free to the veterans.
Okay.
And so
Love that.
we're asking for We're asking for a donation from anybody who has means.
How do they make a donation?
The SpartaProject.org is the easiest way to do that. There's everybody who has gone through the program and their families who are experiencing the healing of this have been instrumental in paying that forward and getting funding for an ongoing cohorts. So we're really completely reliant on the public.
Of course. Okay, so the SpartaProject.org to write and make a donation. 5 intensive days where you do different, I'm sure, exercises and help to reincorporate them back into a tribe so that there's a network for them, because we all need a tribe.
Absolutely, and the tribe conversation is of great importance, and probably an equal importance is the mental and spiritual development that comes from a meditation or mindfulness practice.
We just had our mindfulness moment on the show, Phillip.
Brilliant.
We do that every Thursday.
Oh, brilliant.
We have our mindfulness moment. So, because we know how important
the secret
that is.
sauce.
It is the secret sauce. Okay, so you help them to figure out what that is, because some people don't know what that is and don't know how to do that. So you're helping them to do that.
Yeah, and back to the veteran conversation, the first time that meditation shows up even in a historical mythological context, it was Arjuna, who was that Indian warlord and superhero character that was tasked by the god Krishna to rid India of the warrior class. And he says, I can't do this, these are my people. And he said, I'm going to give you something. And he gives him meditation.
Okay.
And he gives him meditation to be able to defeat his enemies and absolve him of all wrongdoing.
Oh.
So the most hardcore masculine operator military guy who doesn't want to do the hippie meditation, you say, actually, meditation was a gift of the gods to the warrior class.
Okay,
to
and
be
that
able
gets
to,
him.
Absolutely, because you go, and it's not to empower me to defeat my external enemies. That's a metaphor.
Right.
It's really what are the things we need to defeat on an internal level, those demons, and that's really what we're all struggling with, whether it be a transition from prison, inner city, a war environment, or a high trauma upbringing, and so that meditation is absolutely key to that.
And so I can just imagine, Phillip, you must be very successful. 5 days with these folks must really be changing their lives.
We're 100%. We're batting 1,000.
That's amazing.
And we get a lot of, the people, the last house on the block.
Yes.
This is the last hurrah. If this doesn't work, I already have my exit plan.
Yeah.
And we've managed to turn it around every time. So there is a solution to this.
Yeah.
And we have lost less than 8,000 to combat. We have lost over 150,000 since 9/11 to suicide.
Gosh.
It is epidemic. And if you want to ask our country, where are the good men and women? Well, they're killing themselves at least 20 a day, if not substantially more.
Right. I know there's an awareness campaign right now about doing the 22 push-ups. To bring awareness to it, and that certainly has brought it to awareness to me. And I believe in that everything that you put out into the universe has a purpose. And I know that there's someone who stumbled across this today who desperately needed to get this information. So we want to make sure that we let you know that you can find out more information and talk about if it's you or a family member who needs to do this, that it's the SpartaProject.org. Reach out to Phillip and make it happen. Because don't wait, because that's a recipe for disaster. If you're hearing this and you're like, oh my gosh, I needed to hear that, it's for a reason. So reach out and find out more about it. Do you do these every so often, or?
Honestly, we're at the point where, and all of us are volunteers who are doing it, so this is not a for-profit. Whenever we get funding, we run a cohort.
Okay.
And there's a waiting list, obviously, of men and women who are in desperate need of it.
Yeah. And I also want to say, I love that you're doing this with veterans and first responders, but I'm sure that there are parents of teenagers that are watching too, who are like, okay, we could use this. So I want you to think about that and consider if you'd be, and maybe there's something where CARD could work in conjunction with you, that if there were a group of teens on the spectrum who needed to do this, that CARD could do it with you, so that you've got support for anything that comes along that has to do with autism, but that you could do this all important work. And then of course I can see one for families. I'm just saying, Phillip, I see big things. But love that you're doing this, love that you're figuring out what the secret sauce is so we can spread it further.
Absolutely.